Bullies threaten new black girl. Unaware her brother is a five-star U.S. Marshal. Three high school bullies thought they had found their next victim when quiet Tessa Freeman walked through the doors of Hartwell High. What they didn't know was that her older cousin picking her up after school carried federal authority and had zero tolerance for predators. He wasn't just her brother. He was Deputy Marshal Quentin Freeman, a five-star U.S. Marshal who had spent years tracking down the most dangerous fugitives in America. A man who had taught his little sister that if you're going to fight, you fight smart. Have you ever been the new kid? The outsider walking into a cafeteria where every table feels like enemy territory, where whispers follow you down hallways like shadows, and you can feel eyes dissecting everything about you, your clothes, your hair, the way you carry yourself. If you've ever felt like the underdog, hit that subscribe button because you're about to see exactly why you should never judge a book by its cover. Tessa's transfer to Hartwell was sudden, the kind of sudden that comes with family emergencies and guardianship papers signed in courtrooms. She had moved in with her older brother Quentin, a man who wore secrets like expensive cologne, powerful, lasting, but invisible unless you knew what to look for. Nobody at Hartwell knew her story. They didn't know about the boarded-up house across from her old home that had caught fire 3 times. They didn't know her mother was gone. They certainly didn't know that her brother had walked into a courthouse with legal documents and walked out with custody of his little sister. And they had no idea that the quiet man who sometimes picked her up after school was a U.S. Marshal who'd spent the last decade hunting down America's most dangerous fugitives. But none of that mattered now. In this new place, surrounded by unfamiliar faces and whispered judgments, she was just another quiet black girl from somewhere else. The first 2 days passed like a test she hadn't studied for. Teachers mispronounced her name. Students stared when they thought she wasn't looking. She ate lunch alone, walked to classes alone, and went home to a house that still felt like a temporary shelter rather than a home. But by Wednesday, the whispers had found their target. Cole Danner, the school's golden boy quarterback, always surrounded by teammates who treated his every word like gospel. Wesley Wes Caldwell, a sneering linebacker with a crooked smile and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. And then there was Trent Marks, the real architect of cruelty. He didn't need to raise his voice or throw punches to destroy someone. He just watched, studied, waited for exactly the right moment to strike where it would hurt most. The cafeteria at Hartwell High was a carefully orchestrated social ecosystem. Theater kids claimed the tables by the windows, their animated discussions about Shakespeare and student productions creating a bubble of creative energy. The debate team commandeered the back corner, their intense political arguments serving as background noise for the entire room. Athletes dominated the area near the vending machines, their Letterman jackets and loud conversations establishing territorial dominance. And then there were the empty spaces, the neutral zones where students who didn't quite fit anywhere could exist without drawing attention. Tessa walked into this social battlefield carrying her lunch tray like armor, her eyes scanning for the safest possible landing spot. She'd learned long ago that the key to survival in a new environment was observation first, participation never. She was halfway to an empty table in the corner when the voice cut through the ambient chatter like a blade. Well, damn. Didn't know they started bussing kids in from Rikers now. The laughter that erupted wasn't the kind you hear at a comedy show. It was the sharp, cruel laughter of predators who'd caught the scent of blood. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. The entire cafeteria suddenly had front-row seats to whatever was about to unfold. Tessa didn't flinch, didn't look back, didn't quicken her pace or show any sign that the comment had landed. She simply continued to her chosen table, sat down with deliberate precision, opened her apple juice, and stared straight ahead. But Trent Marks wasn't finished. The scrape of his boots across the linoleum floor announced his approach like a war drum. Students at nearby tables leaned in, sensing drama. "You deaf or just rude?" he asked, loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear. Still nothing from Tessa. She took a careful sip of her juice, unwrapped her sandwich, and acted as if she were completely alone in the room. Trent's ego couldn't handle being ignored. He leaned down beside her ear, close enough that she could smell his cologne and feel his breath. "You're not welcome here," he whispered, but loud enough for others to catch fragments. "And you're definitely not going to be queen of the cafeteria, sweetheart. Not in our house. That's when Tessa's eyes finally met his. For just a moment, something flickered in her gaze. Not fear, not anger, but something colder. Something that suggested she'd seen worse than high school bullies and survived. I'm not here for the crown, she said evenly, her voice carrying just enough to reach the listening ears around them. I'm here to eat. The chocolate milk hit her back 3 seconds later. The cold liquid soaked through her sweater as gasps and nervous laughter rippled through the cafeteria. Tessa sat perfectly still for a moment, feeling the milk drip down her spine, watching Trent's satisfied smirk reflected in the metal napkin dispenser. Then she stood up. Not quickly, not dramatically, just a slow, controlled rise that somehow commanded more attention than any outburst could have. She picked up her napkins, cleaned what she could reach of the mess, gathered her lunch, and walked out of the cafeteria with her head high. But as she passed Trent's table, she said something that only he could hear. Thank you. He frowned, confused by her response. But Tessa was already gone, leaving him with the unsettling feeling that he'd just played exactly into someone else's plan. Quentin Freeman knew something was wrong the second he walked through the front door of their modest 2-bedroom house. It wasn't what he saw. Tessa's backpack was hung up properly. Her shoes were lined up perfectly on the entrance mat, and the house looked exactly as it should. It was what he didn't see. No homework spread across the kitchen table. No snack wrappers or evidence of after-school relaxation. No signs of a teenager making herself at home. The house smelled like nothing. Not dinner preparations, not Febreze, not even teenage body spray. Just emptiness. He found her in the garage, standing in front of the heavy bag he'd installed the previous Christmas. Her school clothes were still on, but her sweater was missing. Left hook. Right cross. Left hook. Duck. Elbow strike. Tessa. She didn't stop. Just kept breathing hard through her teeth, working through combinations he'd taught her. You okay? Yep. The single word came out between punches, clipped and unconvincing. Quentin folded his arms and leaned against the doorframe. He'd interrogated enough suspects to know when someone was avoiding the truth. He also knew his sister well enough to wait her out. Finally, after a particularly vicious combination that made the heavy bag swing wildly, she turned to face him. Does being a U.S. Marshal teach you how to ignore bullies? The question hung in the air between them. Quentin studied his sister's face. The set of her jaw, the way she held her shoulders, the careful control in her voice that suggested she was holding back much more than she was saying. No, he said slowly, but it teaches you how to make them regret picking the wrong target. She paused, eyeing him with the same analytical expression he'd seen her use when working through complex math problems. I didn't swing back. Not yet. Good. Quentin nodded approvingly. But I want names. Tessa frowned. You gonna scare them straight? Nope. His smile was predatory. I'm gonna watch and wait. You remember what I taught you? Don't escalate unless it's necessary. Document everything. Never swing first. Exactly. But if they touch you again, I swing like hell. Damn right. That night, over takeout Chinese food, Tessa told him everything. The stares, the whispers, the cafeteria incident. Quentin listened without interruption, occasionally asking for specific details, times, witnesses, exact words used. They don't know who I am, he said finally. Should they? Not yet. But Tessa, he set down his chopsticks and looked at her seriously. Some people only understand one language. If talking doesn't work, if the school doesn't handle it, we speak their language. What language is that? Consequences. By Friday, the harassment campaign was in full swing. Tessa arrived at her locker to find glue poured through the vents, creating a sticky mess that coated her textbooks. Her gym clothes were found stuffed in a toilet, soaking wet and reeking. Most disturbing of all, she discovered a phone hidden in her backpack, set to record, with the camera aimed at where she would change for PE class. She turned the phone over to the main office immediately. That was very brave of you to report this, Principal Sharp told her, his tone suggesting he thought the matter was now closed. We'll look into it. But there was no mention of disciplinary action. No investigation announced. No consequences for whoever had planted the device. In third period English, a photocopied flyer made the rounds. Missing, a clue. If found, return to the new girl. Students snickered as they passed it along, making sure she could see their amusement. Tessa read the flyer, folded it neatly, and put it in her binder. By lunch, Someone had started a group chat called Charity Case Chronicles, sharing photos they'd taken of her throughout the week with mocking captions. Screenshots found their way to her phone within hours. She saved every single one. In seventh period, during her bathroom break, she heard familiar voices from the stall area. "Better watch yourself," came Wes Caldwell's voice, thinking he was speaking privately to someone. "New girl's got some kind of attitude problem. Might need an attitude adjustment." Tessa quietly took out her phone and snapped a photo of his distinctive shoes visible under the stall door, making sure the timestamp was clear. That evening, she sat at her desk with a determination that would have made her brother proud. She created a digital folder labeled Evidence. Screenshots of the group chat, photos of the vandalized locker, the planted phone with its serial number, audio recordings of threats, timestamped documentation of every incident. If they wanted to play games, she'd show them what it meant to play with someone who'd been trained by a federal agent. But the turning point wasn't about what they did to her. It was about what they did to Jayla Cooper. Jayla was 2 years younger, quiet in the way that came from genuine shyness rather than strategic observation. She wore thick glasses, carried a leather journal everywhere, and had the misfortune of sitting next to Tessa in honors chemistry. The association made her a target. On Monday morning, Jayla was walking to her locker when someone accidentally stuck out a foot. She went down hard, her backpack exploding open, papers and pens scattering across the hallway floor. Students stepped around the mess without helping. Some laughed. A few took photos. But Trent Marks did something worse. He picked up Jayla's leather journal, the one she wrote in constantly, filling it with poetry and private thoughts, and started reading aloud. "Listen to this garbage," he announced to the growing crowd. "The darkness in my heart matches the storm outside. What kind of emo nonsense is this?" Jayla scrambled to her feet, reaching desperately for her journal. "Please, give it back." "Oh, it gets better," Trent continued, flipping pages. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone would notice if I just disappeared. Wow, dramatic much?" The laughter was cruel, feeding off Jayla's obvious distress. She was crying now, which only seemed to encourage the performance. That's when Tessa appeared. She didn't run over or shout. She simply walked through the crowd, knelt down, and began collecting Jayla's scattered belongings with methodical precision. When she had everything gathered, she stood up and looked directly at Trent. He was still holding the journal, still smirking, still drunk on the power of public humiliation. "Give it back," Tessa said quietly. "Or what?" Trent challenged. "You gonna cry too?" Tessa stepped closer. The hallway quieted, sensing something shifting in the dynamic. "You made a mistake," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silence. Something in her tone made Trent's smirk falter slightly. But he was too committed to back down now, especially with an audience watching. "What mistake is that, sweetheart?" Tessa took the journal from his hands, not aggressively, just reached over and picked it up as if he'd already decided to give it to her. Then she handed it to Jayla along with the rest of her things. "You'll find out," she said to Trent and walked away. That afternoon, Tessa made a phone call that would change everything. "Quentin, we escalate now." Monday morning at Hartwell High started like any other day. Students filtered in through the main entrance, discussing weekend plans and complaining about upcoming tests. Teachers clutched their coffee cups like lifelines, preparing for another week of educational warfare. But something was different. At 8:47 a.m., exactly 13 minutes before first period, a black Ford Explorer pulled into the visitor parking space directly in front of the main entrance. Students glanced at it curiously. Parent conferences weren't usually scheduled this early, and the vehicle had an official look that didn't quite fit the suburban school environment. The man who stepped out wasn't wearing his usual civilian clothes. Deputy U.S. Marshal Quentin Freeman was in full uniform. The Kevlar vest with U.S. Marshal emblazoned across the chest. The utility belt with cuffs, radio, and sidearm. The badge that caught the morning sunlight like a warning beacon. The boots that announced his presence with each deliberate step across the parking lot. Students stopped mid-conversation to stare. A few pulled out phones, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Quentin walked through the front doors of Hartwell High like he was entering a federal building. His presence commanded attention in a way that suggested this wasn't a social visit. The hall monitors stepped aside instinctively. Even the chattering groups of students seemed to lower their voices as he passed. He walked directly to the main office, past the secretary's desk, and knocked once on Principal Sharp's door before entering without waiting for permission. "Mr. Freeman," Principal Sharp started, looking up from his morning paperwork with surprise and growing concern. "No." Quentin's voice cut through the pleasantries like a blade. "Deputy Marshal Freeman, we have a problem." He placed a thick manila folder on the desk with the kind of precision that suggested its contents were evidence in a federal case. The folder fell open slightly, revealing photographs, printed screenshots, and what appeared to be official documentation. Principal Sharp's coffee mug paused halfway to his lips as he stared at the federal badge, the uniform, the unmistakable authority of someone who was accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Tessa Freeman is my sister," Quentin said, settling into the chair across from the desk with the casual confidence of someone who owned every room he entered. "And your school has allowed her to be systematically harassed, threatened, and targeted by students who believe there will be no consequences for their behavior." He opened the folder fully, spreading its contents across the desk like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. Screenshots of group chats planning harassment, audio recordings of verbal threats, photos of vandalized property, documentation of a recording device planted in her personal belongings. His finger moved from item to item with practiced efficiency. All time-stamped, all verified, all admissible. Principal Sharp's face had gone pale as he recognized some of the evidence, including the phone incident he'd promised to look into but had done nothing about. "Mr. Freeman, I assure you we take these matters seriously." Deputy Marshal Freeman, Quentin corrected again, his tone suggesting that getting his title wrong was becoming a problem. "And no, you don't. Because if you took it seriously, we wouldn't be having this conversation." He leaned forward slightly, and suddenly the room felt much smaller. "I've spent the last decade tracking down fugitives who prey on vulnerable people. I know predatory behavior when I see it. I know systematic harassment when I document it. And I know institutional negligence when it's sitting across a desk from me making excuses." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. "Now," Quentin continued, his voice dropping to the kind of calm that preceded storms, "I'm not here to start a fight. But if you don't address this situation immediately and completely, I will escalate it to the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, the local media, and anyone else who might be interested in how Hartwell High School handles student safety." He pulled out his phone and placed it on the desk. "I have contacts at 3 news stations, 2 newspapers, and a federal education compliance office. Your school district's funding, your personal career, and this institution's reputation are all about 30 seconds away from becoming very public topics of discussion." Principal Sharp was sweating now, his morning confidence completely evaporated. What do you want me to do?" "I want you to do your job," Quentin said simply. "Full investigation. Real consequences. Policy changes that ensure this doesn't happen to any other student. And I want it documented, official, and completed within 1 week." He stood up, leaving the evidence spread across the desk like a map of the principal's failures. "My sister has shown remarkable restraint in how she's handled this situation. She's followed every proper channel, documented everything appropriately, and given your administration multiple opportunities to address the problem." He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. "But Deputy Marshal Freeman is significantly less patient than Tessa Freeman. Do the right thing, or I'll make sure everyone knows exactly how Hartwell High treats students who can't fight back." The door closed behind him with a sound like a judge's gavel falling. Through the office windows, students and staff watched as the federal officer walked back through the hallways with the same authoritative stride. Word spread through the school like wildfire. The new girl's cousin was actually a U.S. Marshal, and he'd just had a very intense conversation with the principal. By lunch, everyone knew that the dynamics at Hartwell High had fundamentally changed. And Trent Marks, Cole Danner, and Wes Caldwell were about to discover exactly what it meant to be hunted by someone who made a living catching predators. If you are excited at this point and eager to hear what happened to these 3 bullies, then hit the subscribe button for the confrontation, the fight, and the viral justice that follows, because what happens next will leave you speechless. The federal investigation hit Hartwell High like a Category 5 hurricane making landfall. Within 48 hours of Quentin's office visit, everything changed. The district's legal department arrived in black SUVs. Security cameras that had been broken for months were suddenly repaired and operational. Teachers who had previously turned blind eyes to harassment were now required to file incident reports for every interaction they witnessed. And most importantly, 3 students found themselves under a microscope that revealed every ugly truth they'd tried to hide. Cole Danner was called out of AP History on Tuesday morning. His parents were waiting in the principal's office, along with a district representative and a stack of printed evidence that made his mother gasp audibly. "Is this real?" Mrs. Danner whispered, staring at screenshots of her son's participation in the Charity Case Chronicles group chat. "Did you really write these things?" Cole's usual swagger evaporated as he saw his own words reflected back at him. "Someone needs to put the new girl in her place. She acts like she's better than everyone else." "Mom, it's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like," the district representative interrupted, sliding more evidence across the table. "Coordinated harassment. Conspiracy to intimidate. And this," she held up a photo of the recording device. "This crosses into criminal territory." Wes Caldwell's interrogation happened simultaneously in the counselor's office. His father, a local businessman who donated generously to the football program, found himself staring at audio recordings of his son making threats. "Better watch yourself," came Wes's voice from the phone speaker, clear and unmistakable. "New girl's got some kind of attitude problem. Might need an attitude adjustment." "Wesley," his father said quietly, "what have you done?" But Trent Marks's meeting was different. He sat alone. His parents were unavailable according to their assistant, facing down a federal case file that read like a predator's handbook. "You targeted a vulnerable student," Principal Sharp read from the official report. "You organized systematic harassment. You humiliated another student in front of witnesses. And according to this evidence, you've been planning escalation." Trent's mask of casual cruelty finally slipped. For the first time since elementary school, he looked genuinely afraid. "I want to call my lawyer," he said. "That's probably a good idea," Sharp replied. By Thursday, Trent was desperate. His carefully constructed social empire was crumbling. Students who had once laughed at his jokes now avoided him in the hallways. Teachers watched his every move. The football coach had suggested he consider focusing on his academics rather than athletics for the remainder of the semester. Worst of all, he could feel the investigation tightening around him like a noose. Federal agents had interviewed witnesses. His phone had been confiscated for digital forensics analysis. Even his closest friends were distancing themselves, afraid of being caught in the blast radius of his destruction. He needed to regain control. He needed to send a message. He needed Tessa Freeman to understand that bringing the authorities into their business was a mistake she'd regret. During gym class, while she was participating in basketball drills, someone rigged her locker with superglue and itching powder. Her regular clothes were contaminated, forcing her to wear her gym outfit for the rest of the day. At lunch, she discovered her sandwich had been tampered with, ketchup mixed with something that made it inedible and suspicious. And at the end of the school day, her phone was missing from her backpack. These weren't random pranks anymore. This was escalation. This was desperation. This was exactly what Quentin had warned her to watch for. When cornered animals get desperate, he told her, they become most dangerous. But they also make their biggest mistakes. At 3:47 p.m., as students filtered toward buses and parent pickup areas, Tessa received a text from an unknown number behind the bus lot. "Come alone if you want your phone back. Tell anyone, and we'll make sure everyone sees what's on it." She stared at the message, recognizing the trap for exactly what it was. 3 predators, no witnesses, no cameras, no teachers. The kind of isolated confrontation where they could do whatever they wanted without consequences. "Perfect." She texted Quentin, "Green light." His response came immediately. "Recording? Already started. Make them swing first. Always do." The area behind the bus lot was Hartwell High's dead zone, a strip of cracked asphalt between the transportation area and the chain-link fence that bordered school property. No security cameras, no foot traffic, no supervision. It was exactly where predators would choose to corner their prey. Tessa walked toward the meeting spot with deliberate calm, her phone discreetly recording in her jacket pocket, her brother's training echoing in her mind. Stay calm. Document everything. Let them show their true nature. And if they put hands on you, end it quickly. They were waiting for her. Cole Danner leaned against the fence, trying to look casual but failing to hide his nervous energy. Wes Caldwell paced back and forth like a caged animal, his linebacker bulk intended to be intimidating. And Trent Marks stood in the center, holding her phone like a trophy. "Took you long enough," Trent called out as she approached. "We were starting to think you'd gone running to your federal boyfriend." "He's my brother," Tessa corrected calmly. "And you have something that belongs to me." "Do I?" Trent examined the phone theatrically. "Seems to me like you lost it." "Careless of you." Cole snickered. "Maybe she's not as smart as she pretends to be." "Smart enough to know this is a setup," Tessa replied, stopping about 10 feet away from them. "Close enough to talk, far enough to react if they moved toward her." "Setup?" Wes stepped closer, cracking his knuckles. "This is just a conversation between friends." "We're not friends." "No," Trent agreed, his mask finally sliding completely off. "We're not. See, you made a very big mistake when you brought outside people into our business. This is our school. Our territory. Our rules. Your rules don't apply to me. They apply to everyone." His voice turned cold, predatory. "And the rule is simple. Stay in your lane, keep your mouth shut, and maybe we let you exist here peacefully. And if I don't?" Trent smiled, but there was nothing friendly in the expression. "Then we teach you what happens to people who don't know their place." The threat hung in the air between them like smoke from a fire about to spread. "Should have stayed quiet," Trent continued, taking a step toward her. "Should have taken the chocolate milk and the jokes and the little pranks like a good girl. But no, you had to make it complicated. Another step closer. You had to bring in your big scary brother with his shiny badge. You had to turn this into some kind of federal case. You had to make us look bad." He was close enough now that she could see the rage in his eyes, the desperate need to reassert dominance that had driven him to this isolated confrontation. "So here's what's going to happen," he said quietly. "You're going to tell your brother that this was all a misunderstanding. You're going to withdraw whatever complaints you filed. And you're going to spend the rest of your time at Hartwell being invisible. Or we make sure you wish you'd never transferred here." That's when he shoved her hard. Tessa stumbled backward but didn't fall, her training keeping her balanced and ready. The push was clear assault, deliberate, aggressive, and witnessed by the phone still recording in her pocket. "You touch me again," she said evenly, "and I'll make you famous." Wes laughed, a sound full of cruel amusement. "Famous? What are you going to do? Tell the principal? Call the police? Your brother's not here to save you now. I don't need saving. We'll see about that." Cole moved to flank her left side, while Wes positioned himself to her right. Classic predator tactics: surround the target, eliminate escape routes, overwhelm with numbers. But they had fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. Tessa Freeman wasn't a victim waiting to be rescued. She was a weapon waiting to be deployed. "Last chance," Trent said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "Apologize. Submit. Or learn why you should have." "I have a better idea," Tessa replied, her hand moving to her jacket pocket. "Smile for the camera." That's when Cole made his move. The fight lasted exactly 47 seconds. Cole Danner, varsity athlete with 30 pounds on Tessa, threw the first punch, a wild haymaker aimed at her head that telegraphed his intention like a neon sign. Tessa dropped low, letting his momentum carry him past her, and swept his ankle with a precision that sent him crashing to the asphalt. The sound of his body hitting the ground was like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Wes Caldwell, seeing his friend go down, charged like the linebacker he was, head down, arms out, trying to tackle her to the ground where his size advantage would matter. She sidestepped at the last possible second, driving her palm upward into his solar plexus as he passed. The strike drove all the air from his lungs in a single explosive gasp, and he collapsed to his knees, wheezing and desperate. Trent Marks, the mastermind who preferred psychological warfare to physical confrontation, suddenly found himself alone with a girl who moved like she'd been trained by someone who fought for a living. "Your turn," she said quietly. He lunged at her, trying to grab her braids, the kind of dirty fighting that worked on girls who had never been taught to defend themselves. Tessa ducked under his reach, caught his extended wrist, and used his own momentum to flip him over her hip in a throw that would have made her brother proud. Trent hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs and the arrogance from his expression. For a moment, the three boys lay groaning on the cracked asphalt, their carefully planned ambush turned into a humiliating defeat by someone they'd assumed was helpless. But Tessa wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone. The real one, not the decoy they'd stolen, and hit record on the camera function. "Say hello to the internet," she said, filming their faces, the bruises already forming, the complete reversal of power that had just occurred. Cole tried to cover his face. Wes was still struggling to breathe. Trent just stared at her with a mixture of fear and rage that suggested he was finally understanding the magnitude of his miscalculation. "This is what happened," she said clearly for the recording. "3 students lured me to an isolated area, threatened me, physically assaulted me, and learned that I'm not as helpless as they assumed." She moved the camera to show the area behind the bus lot, establishing the location and the lack of witnesses. "The next time you want to corner someone you think is vulnerable," she continued, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from knowing you'd won completely, "remember this moment. Remember how it felt to be on the ground looking up at someone you underestimated." She stopped recording and looked down at them with something that might have been pity. "My brother taught me that bullies only understand one language," she said. "Consider this your lesson in fluency." Then she turned and walked away, leaving them to explain to their parents, their coaches, and their friends why 3 varsity athletes had been taken down by the quiet new girl they'd spent weeks trying to intimidate. The video went online at 11:47 p.m. that night. Not on Tessa's accounts. She was too smart for that. Not with her name attached. She understood the power of anonymity. But on a burner account with a description that simply read, "Bullies learn consequences." The footage was strategically edited. It showed the confrontation, the clear aggression from the 3 boys, their threats, the physical assault, and their decisive defeat. But their faces were blurred just enough to avoid immediate identification while still showing the complete reversal of power. Within 6 hours, it had 50,000 views. By morning, it was approaching 200,000. The comments section became a battlefield of justice and outrage. Finally, someone stands up to these entitled brats. "This is what happens when you mess with the wrong person. Those boys got served. Why are their faces blurred? They deserve to be exposed. This girl is my hero." Local news stations picked up the story by noon. "Bullied student defends herself against multiple attackers" became the headline that dominated social media feeds across the state. The video quality was clear enough to identify Hartwell High's distinctive bus lot. Students recognized the voices, even if they couldn't see faces clearly. And by 2 p.m., everyone in school knew exactly who had been behind that fence. Trent Marks found himself surrounded by whispers wherever he went. Cole Danner's girlfriend broke up with him via text. Wes Caldwell's parents grounded him indefinitely and removed him from the football team. But the real consequence was deeper than social embarrassment. The video had captured everything. The premeditation, the isolation tactics, the threats, the physical assault, the complete lack of remorse until they found themselves outmatched. It was evidence. Federal grade, legally admissible, undeniable evidence. If you're loving this story of justice served, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will restore your faith in the system. Principal Sharp's Monday morning coffee went cold as he watched the video for the 5th time. The district superintendent sat across from his desk, along with the school board's legal counsel and 2 representatives from the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights. "This is a disaster," the superintendent said quietly. "National attention, federal investigation, and now viral video evidence of systematic harassment that led to physical assault." The Freeman girl was defending herself, Sharp protested weakly. "The Freeman girl was ambushed by 3 students who had been harassing her for weeks while your administration did nothing," the legal counsel corrected. "She was lured to an isolated area, threatened, and physically assaulted. The fact that she was capable of defending herself doesn't change the fundamental failure of this institution to protect its students." Deputy Marshal Quentin Freeman entered the room at exactly 9 a.m., once again in full uniform, once again carrying evidence that would reshape everyone's immediate future. "Gentlemen," he said, taking the seat that was hastily offered to him. "I assume you've seen the video." Deputy Marshal Freeman, the superintendent began, "We want you to know that we're taking this situation very seriously. Are you?" Quentin interrupted, placing a new folder on the desk. "Because this contains evidence of witness intimidation, conspiracy to commit assault, and what appears to be an organized effort to silence my sister after she reported harassment through proper channels." He opened the folder to reveal printed social media posts, text message screenshots, and what appeared to be a formal federal complaint. Trent Marks, Cole Danner, and Wesley Caldwell coordinated this attack after learning they were under investigation. They lured a minor to an isolated location with the intent to intimidate and harm her. They threatened her safety and physically assaulted her. The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Now, Quentin continued, you have a choice. You can address this situation completely and publicly, implementing real changes that ensure no other student experiences what my sister endured. Or you can continue making excuses while I escalate this to every media outlet, federal agency, and civil rights organization that might be interested in institutional negligence. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of calm authority. The video has 800,000 views and counting. CNN called this morning. So did the Washington Post. The story is already written. The only question is whether Hartwell High is portrayed as a school that learned from its mistakes or an institution that protected bullies until federal intervention forced their hand. The superintendent's pen shook slightly as he made notes. What do you want? He asked. Justice, Quentin replied simply. Real consequences for the perpetrators. Policy changes that prevent future harassment. A public acknowledgement that the system failed and a commitment to do better. And if we comply? Then my sister finishes her education here in peace, and this becomes a story about institutional change rather than institutional failure. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Finally, the superintendent nodded. Consider it done. The expulsion hearing for Trent Marks, Cole Danner, and Wesley Caldwell was held the following Wednesday in the district's main conference room. Their parents hired lawyers. The school board brought federal compliance officers. The media requested access, which was denied, but cameras waited outside the building like sharks, scenting blood in the water. Tessa sat in the witness section wearing a navy blue hoodie with white letters across the chest. I am not your prey. The evidence was overwhelming. Video footage, audio recordings, screenshots, witness testimony, and a paper trail of institutional negligence that made the school board members visibly uncomfortable. When it was her turn to speak, Tessa stood at the podium with the same calm composure she'd shown throughout the ordeal. I didn't come to Hartwell High looking for trouble, she said clearly. I came here to get an education and graduate with my class. What I found was a system that allowed predators to operate freely as long as they were good at sports or came from the right families. She looked directly at the three boys sitting with their legal teams. They chose to target me because they thought I was alone. They thought I was vulnerable. They thought no one would believe me or defend me. Her voice grew stronger. They were wrong on all counts. The school board's decision was unanimous. Indefinite suspension pending criminal charges. College recruitment letters were withdrawn. Scholarship opportunities disappeared. Social media accounts were deleted in shame. But the real victory wasn't in their punishment. It was in what came next. 3 weeks after the viral video, Tessa Freeman did something that surprised everyone. She started a club. The Defense and Respect Collective met every Tuesday after school in room 113. The mission was simple: teach students how to recognize harassment, document evidence, report through proper channels, and if necessary, defend themselves when the system failed. The first meeting had 12 students. Jayla Cooper was one of them, her poetry journal tucked safely in her backpack, her confidence slowly rebuilding. I'm not here to teach you how to fight, Tessa told the group. I'm here to teach you how to never have to fight alone. Within a month, membership had grown to 40 students. Within 2 months, 90. Other schools began requesting information about starting their own chapters. Tessa found herself invited to speak at conferences about bullying prevention and student empowerment. Jayla published her poetry in the school literary magazine. The halls of Hartwell High grew quieter. But it was the quiet of respect rather than fear. The viral video eventually reached 2.3 million views. Comments poured in from around the world, students sharing their own stories, adults reflecting on their high school experiences, parents discussing the importance of teaching children to stand up for themselves and others. But the moment that mattered most to Tessa happened on a Tuesday afternoon in May. She was standing outside the same school gates where her story had begun, helping a new student find her first period classroom, when a freshman girl approached hesitantly. Excuse me, the girl said quietly. Are you her? The girl from the video? Tessa smiled. Depends. Who am I supposed to be? The girl who beat up 3 bullies and made them famous for all the wrong reasons. Close, Tessa replied. I'm the girl who made them listen. The freshman looked confused. What's the difference? Fighting them was easy, Tessa explained. Getting everyone else to pay attention, believe the truth, and change the system, that was the real victory. The girl nodded slowly, processing this distinction. They've been messing with me too, she admitted. Different kids, same behavior. I'm scared. Tessa handed her a flyer for the Defense and Respect Collective. Room 113, Tuesday after school, she said. You don't have to be scared anymore. And you definitely don't have to face it alone. The girl's face lit up with something that had been missing for weeks, hope. As she walked away, Tessa looked back at the school entrance one more time. Then at the black Ford Explorer parked across the street, where Quentin sat with his sunglasses on, sipping coffee, watching over his sister just as he always had. Always watching, always ready, always making sure she knew she was never really alone. She pulled out her phone and sent him a text. Thank you. His response came immediately. For what? Teaching me that being quiet doesn't mean being weak. You taught yourself that, kid. I just made sure you had the tools when you needed them. Tessa smiled and headed back into the school building. There was a collective meeting to prepare for, new members to welcome, and a legacy to continue building. The quiet girl from somewhere else had found her voice, and Hartwell High would never be the same. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you that heroes come in all forms, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that subscribe button for more stories that matter, because we will be back with more tales that prove courage, justice, and transformation are always possible. Remember, you're never as powerless as someone wants you to believe. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is also the most dangerous. And sometimes, the best way to stop a bully isn't to become one yourself. It's to make sure the whole world is watching when they show their true nature. This is Mr. Billy Stories, where every tale teaches us something profound about life. Until next time, keep standing up for what's right.